All right, welcome everyone. I see some of us are joining in through Zoom. Welcome to Zoom. And I see some of you are going to be hopping into Facebook probably in a moment. As you guys join here in the Zoom channel and on Facebook, there should be a link. Those will contain the three files that we're going to play around with today. So if you want to open them up and play around with them during the lecture, or go ahead and download them now and rewatch the lecture and play with them then, you are more than welcome to do so. As we go throughout this lecture today, if you have any questions, go ahead and interrupt with wherever I'm at. And if it's a short question, I'll answer it then. If it's one where I'll need to demonstrate something more complicated, I'll save it for the end, but please ask them as we go. There will be about 5 to 10 minutes saved at the end to answer any particular questions that any of you have. So think of them too if you want to save them up. So today we are going to look at a program called, Adobe Photoshop. And Adobe Photoshop is a raster editing program. And so what it's designed to do is edit a raster image. And a raster image is what you generally think of as a normal picture. So any normal picture file you see on the internet probably is going to be a raster. If you need to get into vector editing, while you can do a little bit of it in Photoshop, that is something you'll really want to do in another program called Illustrator, which there's a follow-up webinar on that as well, if you are interested in making a vector. All right, so even before we get into Photoshop, there is a program called Adobe Bridge that I would recommend that you use if you're going to be using Adobe Photoshop in any sort of professional context. And I'm just going to touch on this program a little bit, just so more so like you guys know that it's here and its basic purpose. If you are familiar with Adobe Lightroom, by the way, this would be the library, yes, the library feature in Lightroom. So there's a program called Adobe Bridge that goes with Photoshop, and what it does is it's a really powerful way to view and organize files on your computer. So like as a photographer, I've got, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of pictures at this point. I have them all loaded into Adobe Bridge so I can sort them and find them. So I've got all my shots by date. And then when I go through, I can look at RAW files, which is a special kind of photo raster file that stores extra information in it. Some computers can't view raster files without a special program, so Adobe Bridge will let you do that. It also allows you to go through and rate them, so you can sort through about which ones you want to come back and look at. It's also a way to quickly view Photoshop files themselves. So like on a normal computer, sometimes it won't preview a Photoshop file or can't open it without opening it in Photoshop. Bridge is a quick way to look at that file, more so because it builds previews of those complicated files. The other nice thing that it does is that it's going to record metadata. So over here on the left side of the screen, you'll notice that there's a section labeled metadata. And all metadata is information that you as an artist or a professional in the graphics field can put in information. And it's also going to contain EXIF information, which is image file information that's embedded in there from a camera. So like for my camera, we can see that I was at shutter speed 100. I was using a weird manual lens that doesn't list the f-stop, ISO 100. And it'll even tell me if I go further down into some of the other EXIF stuff, what camera I was using. It also gives me like a date and time. More importantly, and this is the thing that I really want to point out, is you can get into something called IPTC Core. And this is where you can put in your contact information in this EXIF data. So any other professional in the graphics field will know that if they find this image orphaned floating around on the internet, that they can come over here in Bridge or similar programs and look at the EXIF to see if they list who made the picture or art. This is a way that I've literally gotten money because I've put this information in there where I've been approached for licensing for various pictures and stuff on the net. The other nice thing is that it now is automatically read by Google Image Search. So when you view some, everyone's Google Image Search, and they've got all those images up there now. This will now display, if you have it put in correctly, underneath your image in that image search. So there's even less of a question about who made it for people that are just finding stuff on the internet. So again, Adobe Bridge, a very powerful way to organize your work and view files that normally you'd have to open up in Photoshop to be able to view, and a way of putting in your contact information into any image that you're later going to upload to the internet or just store. So very good, very important program, and I would spend some more time looking at it in the future if you're going to be doing a lot of work. If you're going to be doing a lot of work in Photoshop. All right, so let's switch to the actual program. So let's switch to Photoshop. And let me close Bridge. There we go. All right, so this is Adobe Photoshop. When you first open it up, it will have this home screen. Normally the home screen will either display recent files that you have opened up or the Learn section. I have a Learn section set up for you guys to look at default, simply because it is a surprisingly excellent way to approach work and approach learning Photoshop. So like there's plenty of books and other videos out there, but these tutorials are surprisingly good and worth going through if you see any questions that could be answered. If you have any questions and you see like a topic that will answer it, so like making an image brighter or darker. These are excellent. So like, don't be afraid to use the Learn section. So in Photoshop, you have two main options, which is to start from scratch, which that's a different lecture. We're going to work for editing already existing images. So we're going to use Open. So go ahead and hit Open and navigate to wherever you have your files stored. So like in my case, Workshops, Mentoring, Photoshop files. And let's go ahead and open up this regular editing.cr2. And what a CR2 file is a raw file. So if you're a professional photographer or you come across one of these files on the internet, raw files contain all of this extra information in them that allow you to do pretty amazing things to the files. Let's go ahead and open this guy up. And what Photoshop will do is open up a separate program called Adobe Camera Raw. And Adobe Camera Raw is basically, if you're already familiar with Lightroom, it's 90% the same as the Develop module. Because it's mostly the same as the Develop module, I'm not going to spend too much time in Adobe Camera Raw, just because it's very similar. So once you have the raw file, or go ahead and open it up, you're going to click Open a second time to actually get it into Photoshop. Let me reset my workspace. There we go. And so when you guys first open up Photoshop, it's probably going to look something like this. So this is our default workspace in Photoshop. So it's called the Essentials workspace, and it's a pared down version of where all the tools are going to be. For us today, let's actually switch our workspace. And to switch our workspace, we'll click in this top right area where we see this rectangle. And in here, we're going to pick photography. And you can see that there's these other different modes that Photoshop is capable of working in. So like there's a 3D mode. So if you really want to, you can make 3D models in Photoshop. I wouldn't, but it is a useful way to edit textures for 3D models and models. Like if you don't have a better program laying around, or you want a certain tool that's in Photoshop, it's very useful for, doing some very basic editing. Motion is a very primitive video application. I don't know why it's in here. I think it's left over from way back when, but I would also avoid using Motion. Painting's pretty good. It's for exactly what it sounds like. Digital painting. Photography is the one that we're going to use, also pretty good. And then graphic and web is decent, but most of this stuff would be better done in Illustrator. So like the two really big hats that I would spend the most time in Photoshop is painting, working from scratch, or photography, where you're going to edit an image. So when you're in any sort of workspace in Adobe, the layouts generally are going to be the same. So over here on the left, we're going to have our tools. And so these are basically different ways of changing my mouse into doing different things that allow me to edit or change or view the picture that I'm working on. And then as you notice, as I click through these across the top right here, this will change. So this is our options bar, which will contain additional controls for whatever tool I am currently using or I have active. And then over here on the right, we have our panels. And so panels are additional controls or additional options to allow us to work with the image. And then it also has the most important panel in Photoshop, which is going to be our layers panel. First, though, let's set up our space and take a look at customizing our panel layout. So you notice how we have these two little arrows right here. So if you click on those, that'll expand this second layer of panels out. And then if I wanted to, I could always click and drag on any of the tabs that have a label in it to move it around, or even drag it out and make it like a whole nother column if I wanted to. In this case, I'm just going to leave it collapsed down. Libraries is a very interesting panel once you get going, where you can save different resources that you use a lot. So like I was working on a book where I had to use figure whatever all the time. And so I just turned it into a button that I could drag into anything that I was working on in InDesign. In our case, we don't need our library. So I'm going to go ahead and right click where it says library, and I can click close to get rid of it, leaving my adjustments tab, which we are going to be using today, open. We're also not going to use clone source, so I'm going to go ahead and right click on clone source and close that one. And we've got kind of a nice little workspace right here to get going. Right here in the top right are two panels I want to talk about real quick for a second. We've got the histogram and the navigator. The histogram will show me the distribution of tones in my image. And so you can see how there's this huge hole of space right here where there aren't any lines. And that's telling me, regardless of what my screen brightness looks like, that this image is very dark. It's missing a bunch of tones. So as I edit the picture, I want to stretch this histogram out to restore all those tones properly. And then the navigator is a way of moving around this image. And there's going to be a lot of ways that we can move around an image. And getting fast at moving around an image is going to be one of the things that helps you to be good and quick at Photoshop, more than like memorizing the other hotkeys. The ones for movement are important. So we've got like this handy little slider right here that allows us to zoom in and out. And then we can click and drag on this area to move around. So like if I want face, I can just click on the face. If I need to check my corners, which is pretty common, I can click up into the corners. Now, when I'm zoomed in like this, no matter what tool I have active over here on the left, if I hold down the space bar on my keyboard, my active tool will turn to a hand. And this hand is super useful because it allows me to click and drag around on my screen to change where I'm looking, rather than clicking and dragging up here. So the space bar, again, is a really good way to move around your image. So keep that hotkey in mind. Another good one to know is Command or Control 0, depending on if you're Windows or Mac. So I can hit Command or Control 0 to fit it to my screen so I can see everything that's active in this image. All right, so let's talk about doing some basic corrective edits. So this picture is too dark. So we've got a bunch of really good options to fix how dark it is. And our four big ones are exposure, which is going to mimic kind of like how this stuff works in photography. Curves, which is a very powerful way to change the brightness and darkness of an image and do some basic color correcting. Levels, which is another useful way of moving around exposure. And then brightness and contrast, which I don't use too much anymore, but it's a very basic way of brightening. And then if you're used to gamma adjustments, it also gives you access to that. So to start with, I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click on this levels button. And what this will do is make an adjustment layer. So when I click on the levels, I get a layer. And what a layer is exactly what it sounds like. Think of it as like think of your layer panel as like a stack of paper or transparent plastic or anything that you can pile up like that. And each one will be a big stack on top of each other. And so if you think of it like as a transparent piece of plastic, or like if you're familiar with old animation, you would have like, they would paint Scooby and they would put Scooby on top of like a painted background. Same idea. Or let's say they had that painted background, they put Scooby on top of it, and then they wanted to make it feel like night, even though they painted it like a day scene. They could then put a semi-transparent, a clear blue plastic layer over that to tint everything blue to make it feel like night. That's in essence is what's going on with these layers. And the beauty of doing these adjustments with layers is it's going to be reversible. So like other ways that I can make this level adjustments rather than just clicking right here, I can also click this half circle right here and pick levels. I can also come up to layer and go to new adjustment layer and pick levels. That's going to all do exactly the same thing where it's going to make a level. However, there's the danger menu. So if I come up to image and I go to, oops, I gotta have the background layer selected, there we go. I go up to image and I go to adjustments and I go to levels. This is going to give me the levels interface without making a layer. And this is dangerous because I have no way of undoing this once I save and close this image. Like I can go ahead and hit undo and I can undo it, which is nice. But if I save and close this, you lose the ability to undo it. So that's what we call a destructive edit, an edit that you can't undo. And Photoshop is set up in such a way that you should pretty much never have to do like a truly destructive edit. You should always have access to undoing it. And so that's a core important principle of good use in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on this layer to make it active. I'm going to click on the half circle in this case. And you'll notice that down here in properties, we go ahead and make properties a little bit bigger, we get an interface for this levels tool. And so just like the histogram we saw up here, we have a more accurate histogram right there for us to adjust these tones. And so what this will allow me to do is if I click and drag this one over, it's going to reset the white point to wherever this tone is in this image is now going to be white. Same thing, I could click and drag on this one to set, you know, all those tones to be black. And so you can see that everything from here left is now true black, and you can see all those chunky in there. I don't really want to do that. So, you know, like about 200 or so for that white tone, and it, you know, brightens up the image a fair amount. Same thing, like I can click and drag the center one over, and this is how I can kind of either reduce contrast or add contrast to the image. So if you leave it at 1, that kind of defaults it. The slider underneath it allows you to say, I want my darkest or brightest value to be, you know, brighter or darker. So like I want my darker value to be not true black, but off true black. So this is how you can do that off, that washing out thing that's very popular on Instagram. Or I don't want any true whites, and I can just drag this down and that'll limit out the true white tones in my image. So it's still a little dark and a little lacking of contrast. So we're gonna make what's called an S-curve to give it a little bit more contrast. So this is where we can click the curves, or again, we can come down here and click down here and pick curves, or again, layer, and you can go to new adjustment layer and pick curves. And when you do it from up here, it's like, do you want to name it something special? And it's like, no, we'll just click OK. So this is kind of the same idea. I've got this slider right here to set my input and output points for my black tones. Like you can kind of look at this. It's not 100% true, but like as the white and black points we were just looking at in the levels. But instead of having this middle slider right here, we now have a line. And so I can click on this line to add a point, and then I can click and drag that point up and down, and I can add in as many points as I want. So for a photograph, it is very common to add a point and drag it up a little bit, and then add another point and drag it down a little bit, and that adds contrast. If I want to see, you know, what effect this had on the image, I can always change whether or not my layer is visible. So in this case, is this effect visible? So I can click on this eyeball, and I can see the effect that it's having on the image. So maybe not quite that much brightening, and maybe I want to bring this down. I do want to darken it, but I want to preserve a little bit more of those mid-tones when I'm darkening. There we go. So like I've got a point right there, and I've got a point, you know, a little bit off center, and I've got a point up top just to kind of help smooth out that curve. And again, poking it in the eyeball, doop, 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 we can see the effect that it's having on the image. This image is also a little cold, so why don't we warm it up? So I've got a bunch of ways to change color in an image. So like I've got my hue saturation, I've got my color balance, I've got a photo filter. So if you are familiar with old school photo filters from like the 60s and 70s and 80s, this is fairly analogous to it. It's like if you even go into it, you can pick warming filter 80, 85 or whatever, which is like the old warming filter 85. That said, I don't want to use it. And notice when I say I don't want to use it, rather than coming up and going to edit and undo, I'm just clicking through here on these steps. So this is the history tab. So the history tab, as you can see, records every single change I make to the image. However, the way it's recording it is linear. So like if you think of this as like a timeline, and they talk about like in movies, or they go back in time and they form a new timeline and they lose access to the one that they had before. Same thing right here in this history one. So I clicked back to layer visibility to remove adding that photo filter. And now when I come up to color balance, this new photo filter one is going to go away. So any future step when I make a new edit will go away. So keep that in mind. Like my old ones will always be preserved. Color balance is a super powerful way of editing color in your image. So in this case, when I'm looking at this, it's got not very much red and maybe a little bit too much blue and green. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna try dragging the reds over a little bit. And why don't we go ahead and add in a little bit of yellow. So like I've got +8 right here and -17. And you can change these values to whatever, so like -15 now. You can also type in right here, which is very, very convenient. And then even more convenient than that, let's say that there, whatever numbers you've got in here, and like a different one, or like you're doing pixel size or whatever. If you want, you can actually type in math formulas into here to change it. So like I could put in divided by 3 and hit -3. I could put in divide by 3 and enter, and it changes that to -5 for me. So like it's very powerful in that you can hand type in math formulas, which is very useful. So again, poking in the eyeball, you can see the effect that this had on the image. I'm going to go ahead and poke the eyeball to hide it, because I want to show you the hue saturation tool as well. Hue saturation tool, so I've got hue, which is literally color, saturation, which is the purity of the color, and then lightness, bright and dark, which I think is fairly straightforward. So hue allows me to change kind of the overall color of the image, but more powerfully, it allows me to click where it says master and pick a certain color and say, I want to edit just that one. So let's say, that blue collar right there, I want it to be a different color. So actually, why don't we turn that color balance layer back on so there's less blue overall. And I'm looking at that blue collar. So I'll click master and I'm going to go to blue. And if I drag the hue tool now, you can see that I can change, that collar to whatever color I really want. So let's say red. And you can see that it's picking up some areas outside of there. And this is where, if I only wanted to grab this is where I want to add something called a layer mask. So if we look at my layers over here, you notice how there's these white rectangles next to each one of these. So these are my masks. So this is a way of saying, I don't want this, I want X or whatever to be affected underneath it, or I want to block out the effect. So if I pick up the paintbrush over here on the left, let me put my paintbrush back to default. There we go. So if we pick a paintbrush over here and, you make it bigger and you set the hardness to 0 or whatever. So you just like pick soft round and then make it bigger. And my mouse isn't going to be accurate for this because I've made it very large to make it easy to see in the video. But if I make the layer active and I make black active over here, and I can just click on one or the other, I can click this little flipper dude to change the active between black and white. I can say I don't want to affect here, and you can see how it adds a little black dot right there. So it's affecting his nose. If I paint over his nose, it's no longer affecting his nose. And I can go through and paint out any areas that when I'm changing this from blue to red, that it's picking up that I don't like. So now you can see that it's affecting, for the most part, only his collar. Not too bad, right? So let's open up another image and take a look at some other things that you're going to need or want to know how to do when you're first getting into Photoshop. So I can always click the home button, and I have my open button right here to get back to, or I can click the PS to get back to the screen. Another way to open stuff instead of having to go to this area is I can always just go up to File, Open, or I can hit Command or Command O, on my keyboard for the hotkey. So let's go ahead and open up Cupcake. So this cupcake, let's say that for whatever weird reason, I want to put a cupcake on here. You know, like I want to make a card right here that says "Happy Birthday, Lee." The dog's name is Lee, by the way. He's my puppy. So I need some way to only have the cupcake. So I'm going to use something called a selection. So kind of like this layer mask thing. I can use a selection to grab part of this. I won't make a mask, but I'll copy and paste it over instead. And so I have a lot of ways of making selections, and this is where a lot of the talent in photo editing comes from. It's like, how good are you at making and understanding masks and selections? However, Photoshop has made this much, much easier. In fact, the latest update made this quite a bit easier. So we have our marquee selection, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can draw a rectangle. And notice when I draw this rectangle, I get these kind of I get this outline. We call this outline marching ants in the Photoshop world. And so I would have the selection that looks just like that. So if I copy and pasted this over right now, it would be that rectangle. If I click and hold where that marquee tool was, you'll notice that there's also the elliptical one, which is, the circle version of that. But neither of these are going to be good for grabbing this cupcake. But notice how a lot of these have that little arrow next to it. So that means that there's more but similar tools hiding underneath it. So the next one down is my lasso tool. And the lasso tool is exactly what it sounds like. I can click and drag and draw a line. And wherever I draw that line will become my selection. So if I was feeling masochistic, I could zoom in and try to painstakingly draw around this, and it wouldn't be fun. If I click and hold on the lasso tool, you'll see I'll get the polygonal tool next, which is the same idea except it draws straight lines. Also notice how I can click off to the, notice how I can come off to the side of this image, and it's not going to select any of that gray area. It's just going to come right up into this edge for me, which is very useful. Now if I click and hold, yep, nothing's like that now. If I click and hold on the on the lasso tool again, I get the magnetic lasso. And so this used to be one of our go-to tools as a photographer. So you would zoom in. So I'm hitting Command or Control plus, and you would click along whatever you're trying to have as the edge of your selection. And it would try to intelligently, as you're dragging, as you're moving the mouse over the area, try to find the edge that you're going along and build a selection off of that. And as you can see, it's not great, and it's not fun. But it's where we used to be. Better than that is I have the next tool down, which is called the Quick Select tool. And it's basically a paintbrush where I paint and I say I want this selected, and I paint over it, and it goes like, oh, I think you want this, I think I want this, I think you want this, and like magic, it does a pretty good job. But notice I get like this little blip over here. So this is where I need to modify my selection. So with my brush tool active, you'll notice that I have all these buttons up here now. So I have my default version of it. I have the plus sign saying that I want to add to whatever I'm painting over. And then I have the minus, which says I don't want what I'm painting over. So like I can just paint over these areas to tell Photoshop to try to remove those for me. And it's not perfect. I'm going to paint over that area, get rid of that. And again, my mouse is going to appear, the paintbrush is actually quite a bit smaller than my mouse appears right now. I've just made it bigger so it's easier to see. And so like there's a reasonable selection of that cupcake. Now let's say this cupcake, let's say I wanted to be even lazier than this, which there's a way to be even lazier. So if this tool active, I can also try the Select Subject button, and it's just a button click, and it will try to figure out what the subject of the picture is and select it for me. So in this case, it has the hand on there as well. And this is where Photoshop's creepy, like just figures it out, like, holy cow, Photoshop. But in this case, I don't want the hand in there as well. So Select Subject won't work. This is so let's take a look at one of the new tools that they added called Object Selection. So I'm gonna hit Command D to deselect, or go up to Select, Deselect to remove the one I just did. And I'm just gonna draw a box over this cupcake, and let's see what it does. And cupcake selected. I mean, like, as somebody who works professionally in photography and Photoshop, this is like, holy cow, thank goodness, Photoshop, you've made my life so much easier. But it's also like, wow, one of the hardest things to do in Photoshop that used to require a lot of talent is very easy. And this image, by the way, this cupcake is very easy to select. That's why I picked it. So we have all those different methods. And in this case, this one worked really well here. But understanding these a little bit will help you figure out the best method to grab what you want. So I'm going to head and hit Command or Control C, or you come up to Edit, Copy, and I'll come over to my regular editing one with my dog and hit Command V, and there's my cupcake. Now my cupcake is in the wrong spot, so I want to move it. So I'll grab Mr. Move tool. So that's the very first one here in our toolbar, and that will allow me to click and drag stuff around on my screen. And notice how like I've got a cupcake layer right here, and that tiny thing would be the cupcake. I want to make it bigger, so I'd come up to Edit, Transform, or Free Transform. That gives me a little bounding box around it, and allows me to click and drag to make it bigger. So, bigger cupcake. And when I'm happy with where it's placed, I just double click and it will drop it down in there. My layer preview over here updates. And let's say I wanted like all those edits I did to the dog to apply to it. I could drag this layer down underneath those, and all of those edits will start applying to it. You see how much brighter it is now? Not so much. I'm gonna drag it back up to the top. Then I can click on T for text, and it will give me the text tool. Right here, I can pick the color for my text. I don't know, I'll just pick a nice green. And the color tool I really get into in the painting one, but like it's a powerful tool. Then I can click wherever I want to add text and say, happy birthday, Mr. Lee. And that text should be bigger, so why don't I go ahead and select all of it. So I hit Command A, and I can come up here and, ooh, no bigger, so I'll have to type in, a bigger size, like 150 or whatever. Go back to my Move tool and position that a little bit better. Happy birthday, Mr. Lee. So let's look at some of the other corrective tools that are available to us in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that last image that we haven't done yet. So I'm going to go up to File, Open, and I'm going to come down to Landscape Crabs and click Open. This will open up in Adobe Camera. Again, you're welcome to play around in this, but it's pretty much the same thing as Lightroom, so I'm not going to get into it. And we'll click Open. And it's a big boy file, it's big, so it'll take it a hot minute. And we've got this nice landscape, but we've also got this drone. So if I, hit Command plus to zoom in, or Control plus, and then use my space bar to get the hand tool and kind of really center this guy and look at it, we can see that if I printed this off, this is blurry, which would make for an unsatisfying picture. So I want to remove this drone. And by the way, for the kind of edit that we're about to do, it's always good to start zoomed in so you can be more accurate in what our selection is going to be. So we've got a bunch of ways to remove this. First thing first is we do need to select it. So I'm going to go ahead and try that Object Select tool and see how well that works on the drone. I haven't actually tried this tool on this picture before, so I'm kind of interested to see how it'll do. Although, what's nice about some of the ways that we're going to try to remove this is that it doesn't have to be that good of a selection. And we can see that this selection won't work because it's leaving in some of those crossbars and it's leaving in the blur for the blades. So we'll have to use a different selection method. In this case, go ahead and click and hold and get the regular lasso tool and pretty lazily just kind of select around it. You don't have to be perfect. And release, just so we kind of a general selection. So this is the object we want to remove. So we've got a couple of automatic ways. We can come up to Edit, Fill, and so this will fill whatever I have selected, or it will fill the whole layer. And when I'm in Fill, I can pick Content Aware out of the contents right here where it says black. I'm going to pick Content Aware. I can click OK. And it will terrifyingly, like magic, look at everything that's around this thing and be like, I think you want it to look like that. And, you know, Photoshop, being the terrifying beast that it is, I'm clicking up here in my history to show you the difference. You know, it's gone. This is a little bit older. It's maybe like 3 or 4 years old now, 5 years old. When they added this is another one of those things where people that were professional Photoshoppers started getting a little nervous, because fixing something like this used to be not fun. So what you used to have to do is you would grab this clone tool right here. And with the clone tool active, you would hold down the Alt or Option key to select a source. And then you would copy paste over what you were trying to remove. And you used to have to kind of, my flow is down. That's why it's going like that. You would copy paste over, and you would have to try really hard to blend in these edges to hide what you were doing. But if I wanted to, you know, duplicate this would be a great way to do it. So I'd hold down the Alt key and click on my drone to set the source from there. And then, you know, I can copy and paste my drone over to another spot. But that's not what we want to do, so undo. Another way that I can remove this is to use the successors of the clone tool, which would be the healing brush tool and the spot healing brush tool. So if I pick the healing brush tool, I have that same necessary thing where I need to say, I want to copy from, I don't know, here. So I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, again, depending on my operating system, to set where I'm copying from. I'm going to make my brush bigger, because my brush is too small right now. And again, my brush size is going to look huge, but I've just made it bigger for it's easier for you guys to see. And you can see how it previews in the copy that it's going to do. And I'm going to kind of paint over the drone. You can see how it's kind of live updating the appearance of it. And what it does is it's doing exactly what the clone did. And then just like with that content aware fill that we were looking at earlier, is wherever I'm healing in, it's going to look at the stuff around it and be like, probably should have edge like this, and, you know, try to make it look good. Now, if I don't need that much control, or I need to set a source, I can pick the Healing Brushes lazier option, which that's one of the fundamental things in Photoshop, is how lazy can I be? Because the lazier you can be, the faster you can get stuff done, your better your productivity. And so in this case, I just be like, I don't like you, drone. And I just kind of paint over you. So I'm clicking and holding right now, painting over Mr. Drone, and then release. Photoshop will twiddle its thumbs for a second and think about life, and then it's gone. Now this tool can sometimes backfire on you, like where you try to do an edge, although it's gotten pretty good. Where you'll hit an edge and something will like merge together weirdly. I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it happen on this picture. Why don't we try this one? Command D. Yeah, you can see where it can make weirdness instead of doing what you actually want it to do. My mouse is being grumpy. So let me click on anything. There we go. Go back into landscape. So that's one more way to, let's look at a couple more ways to get this thing gone. So I'll go back to open. And again, I'm not necessarily showing you the best way to remove this. I'm showing you all of the ways to remove it, because depending on what you're editing later, you're gonna need a different one of these tools. So one of the ones we haven't looked at yet is the patch tool. And so this allows me to use basically a primitive lasso to draw around it. And then I can just click and drag off to the side to patch from that area down into there. So it's pretty similar to what we did earlier with the edit fill, but it's also pretty similar to that spot healing brush tool, except in this case, I'm going to just draw around something and then drag over to where I want the source to be. So another good way to remove stuff. One last thing that I want to talk about is if I do this content aware thing where I go around it, those of you who are really looking at my screen probably notice that underneath fill was content aware fill. So if we go into content aware fill, we get a much more robust version of that fill technique. So over here on the left, we have our selection, so the object that we're trying to remove, and then areas marked in green. And areas marked in green is where it's going to look at to copy from to remove the image. So, you know, this is where I can come in with this paintbrush tool and I'll pick minus and be like, I don't actually want any of this guy up here. Or, you know, I could be really silly and I can click plus. And let's say I wanted, you know, a bunch of this grass in there as an area for it to look at. And that will affect how it adds stuff back in. And it's thinking right now, I wonder what it'll look like. Zoom out by dragging the, oh, might have just made Photoshop mad. Yeah, I made it mad. Yeah, so you can see a little bit of that texturing from down here and there. So if I went through and removed all of the sky, you would see kind of this weird texture of the ground in the sky instead. So those are all the really good ways to remove this guy. I think in my case, I'm just gonna go up to edit and do content aware fill and click OK. Bye-bye, Mr. Drone. So to kind of review some of the stuff we did earlier, if I was going to edit this image, I would want to do some pretty basic tonal stuff. We'll keep it pretty simple. We won't get too fancy. So like I would come over to my curves tool, and in my curves tool, I would just click and drag down a little bit. And then I'd grab my brush tool. And you know what, why don't we brush out in my layer mask, the ground. You know, I want to make this brush even bigger. Again, my brush preview is massively off. Like if you're just joining in and be like, why is this brush so big? It's because I've made my mouse cursor very large so it's easy to see. And so you can see over here on the mask, that black area is where I've told it not to have any effect. And you can see now that it's just darkening the sky. So if I click back onto that circle, I can now, you know, click and drag down on that sky to make like a nice moody appearance. Maybe drag up a little bit up here to preserve some of those highlights. You know, a nice little contrast curve to pop that sky. And you know what, let's do the same thing to the ground. So I'll make, let's do a levels adjustment this time. And rather than remaking this mask, I am going to hold down the Alt or Option key, click on the mask and drag up. Notice how I've got a double mouse cursor right now. Release my mouse. It's gonna ask me if I want to replace it, and I'll say yes, and it's duplicated that mask up there. So I'm going to make that level mask active by clicking on it. And I'll go up to Image, Adjustment, Invert. And it flips now the tones of that mask. So now I will be affecting just the ground with my levels adjustment. So I'll click that half circle. And let's add some bright tones to the ground. And let's add some contrast by dragging those mid-tones over. You know, if I was doing this, you know, for keeps, I'd be a lot more careful about how I'm distributing my tones right now. But like for us, this is, you know, it's a good little review of how these tools work. And you know what? You see that little white dot in there? That bothers me. So I'm going to hit Command or Control plus and zoom in. I'm going to hold down my space bar to get the hand tool, and I'm going to drag over till I get to those white dots. And in this case, I think I'm just going to use that spot healing brush. I'm going to make the background active by clicking on it. And I want a smaller brush. I've right-clicked, by the way, to get to that menu. You can also click up here to get the same menu. And, you know, and, you know, that stop sign can go away too. And so now I don't have those distracting little white dots over there. You know, let's get rid of those trees too. Bye, trees. I'm just going to paint you out. You're not Bob Ross trees. You're not happy trees. You're sad trees. Oops, left a little bit of it in there. All right, so I've got my image. Now let's say I wanted to share it on Facebook. What should I do? So this image is the huge. It would take 9 million years to upload to Facebook. So I would want to make it smaller. So I'm gonna come up to image and then go to image size. And image size allows me to set the pixel size of my image. And if yours doesn't say pixels, click right here and select pixels. Make sure resample is turned on. And then where it says resolution, type in 72. And then for width, type in for the longest side, in this case width, sometimes it's type, for your longest side, or tallest, type in anywhere from 900 to 1200. Those are really good rule of thumb image sizes for the internet. especially if you don't want your stuff to get stolen, to wander off. 900 is a pretty good number. And that will shrink it down to a size appropriate for viewing on the web, and will also keep your file size smaller. Although I made a little goof. So why don't we actually click back on our history back to Healing Brush, and we need to save first. So I'm going to go up to File, I'm going to go to Save As, and it's going to be like, what do you want to save this as? And the default is going to be a PSD. So a PSD file is what you will save to keep your layers. So if you want to keep your layers, you save it as a PSD file. They are going to be huge. They're going to take up a lot of room on your computer, but it keeps everything lossless. So like, it doesn't matter how many times you save it, it doesn't hurt it. And you get the ability to be able to access your layers and undo or change things. Excuse me. And then you would click Save. And I don't need another PSD of this, so I'm not going to click Save, but you get the idea. Cancel. Then I would go to image size to make it smaller. And then I would want to save it as a JPEG. So I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to go to Save As, not Save. Because if I go to Save, it's going to save it over my PSD. So I'm going to go to Save As. And in my drop-down, I'm going to pick JPEG. Now, there's a bunch of different options in here. And the only ones that you'll probably ever use is Photoshop for storing your original work. JPEG for sharing your work on the internet, and basically any way that if you're going to send your image to somebody and they're not going to be printing it, send it as a JPEG. Photoshop PDF, if they ask for a PDF, this is where you can do it. PNG, graphic designers may use this one every so often. This is where if you need to make a transparent background, you can do that, which isn't supported in JPEG. And then TIFF is basically, it's somewhere between a PNG and a Photoshop file in that it preserves a huge amount of information, but it doesn't preserve as much as a Photoshop file does. And this is what you would send somebody for high-end professional printing. So let's say I was going to send my stuff over to Hamilton Color Lab. I'd send them my TIFFs. And there's a lot more about underlying file quality and how to maintain it. If you're going to be doing super high-end printing, that's a very, very large topic. And if that's something you're interested in, you'd want to look up something called color management and how it applies to Photoshop, to fine art photography and printing. So you would pick JPEG and you would click Save. If it asks you to embed the color profile, the question is yes, you do want to embed your color profile. Speaking of which, mine is in ProPhoto. The color profile you'll probably see is going to be, if it opens, sRGB or Adobe RGB. And this is part of that color management thing I was talking about. But as long as you're in sRGB or Adobe RGB, you're fine. Just save it in that. And if you're not, if you somehow end up in ProPhoto RGB or something weird, just come to Edit, go to Convert Profile, and this is for your JPEGs. Go ahead and keep your PSDs and something fancy. And you'll just say Convert to sRGB or Adobe RGB. And you'll probably actually notice a color shift in some of your images when you do this, especially down to sRGB. But yeah, you'd have to really look into color management if that's something you need to know or understand. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and hop onto the Facebook to see if there's any questions there. Those of you that are following along in Zoom, this is your chance. Let me know if you have any questions about how to use Photoshop or how to do certain things in the program. All right, it looks like we don't have any necessary clarifications for the program. If that's the case, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. I hope it's been very useful for you guys, and it'll be saved up on Facebook for you guys to access whenever you want, and the Dropbox link will stay good. I'm not going to do anything to it. So you can go ahead and go back through it a couple times on your own if you want, and best of luck to you guys and have a good one.